On Memorial Day weekend eve, the state of Virginia definitely puts the smackdown on Gold Star family members and veterans in Virginia that are 90% or 100% PNT. This is passed, done, it's a said deal. The state of Virginia is mandating Chapter 35, which, oh, by the way, is a federal benefit. The state is mandating how you spend that. Not just that, okay? Not just that portion. It's for veteran education, Gold Star family member education in the entire state as a whole. It is essentially gone.
Whiskey 9 Yankee, 7 November Golf, over.
So who are you and what led you to where you're at right now?
My name is Kayla Owen. I am the spouse of a 100% disabled veteran in the state of Virginia. I have 2 small children. One is 13, one is 4. And I am the co-founder of an organization called VEMSTEP Friends.
Mm-hmm.
So VEMSTEP Friends came about because at the end of March, the General Assembly tried to put language in that basically decimated the Virginia Military Survivors Education Dependent Program, which provides 8 semesters of education to veterans or Gold Star families that are 90% totally and permanently disabled or more. And that is a service earned benefit in the state of Virginia.
All right. So how does this bill affect you personally?
So it affects me personally because it has basically cut my own ability to go back to school. So there's that component to it. But it really just absolutely guts a program that's been in place for 26 years. So this started back in 1996. Was ratified again in 2006, which is when it became VEMSTEP. In 2019, it was expanded so that it included non-combat veterans. So prior to 2019, it was combat 90% TNP or above and included Gold Star families. In 2019, that was expanded. When it was expanded, the program did grow. But the point we're at now is basically the State Council for Higher Education and the universities are crying poor because it is a tuition waiver program and they are blaming the cost of tuition increase in the state of Virginia on a very, very small percent of the population. So we know that 1% of higher education students in the state of Virginia receive this program, so less than 1%. We know that veterans are 7% of the entire population in the state of Virginia. We know that veterans own 12% of small businesses in the state of Virginia, so we certainly contribute economically as a population. But basically this program got massacred, and it got massacred by legislating through the budget. And legislating through the budget, they basically snuck language in the back, ironically on page 641, both times. So House Bill 30, they snuck it in on page 641. The governor came back and put in 2 amendments in place. Those amendments were not accepted. He intended for this to go to a study to be looked at for the long-term sustainability of the program, claiming that there were financial issues. The financial issues, which were defined by Chev, stated the program would cost $180 million over 2 years. We absolutely refute that. It is not consistent with any data that we have seen. It is not consistent with data provided by the Department of Veteran Services. It is not consistent with data provided by the universities themselves.
So what exactly are the changes that the state passed?
So in Senate Bill, House Bill 6001 on page 641, without mention of the name of the program whatsoever, the new changes specifically are that you are required to fill out a FAFSA, not an issue. It is limited to your first bachelor's degree only. So that basically excludes a lot of spouses by the time that your husband or your spouse gets to a point in their career that they are injured or become disabled. Most times people have already completed a first bachelor's degree. And depending on the disability that your spouse has, you may need to change careers, or you may need a career that is more income generating based on your family's financial situation. One thing that's interesting that we found is that most of the people that are using this for higher education currently are using it in areas that are defined by the state of Virginia as being areas of critical need. So these are things that are being recruited outside of the state of Virginia. The state is paying money to bring in people in the areas of healthcare, in the areas of education, and in the areas of STEM. And those were the 3 most prominent areas that we found for spouses that are using this for higher education anyway. So it's like you can give it to veteran spouses that are already here that qualify for this benefit, or you can pay money to bring in people from outside. It would seem to me that it would be better for that money to be allocated here.
All right.
Oh, the two more changes. Sorry.
No, keep
They
going, keep going.
become the state becomes last payer. So as we talked about before, that requires your expected family contribution has to be paid first. Any federal grants have to be paid first, and you're required to use your 38 USC Chapter 35 benefits prior to the VMS step paying $1. And then the final detail, which is also a problem, is the grandfather deadline was May 15th of this year. So the budget was signed the evening of the 13th, and on the 15th, that is the last day that you had to commit to a school for the fall. So again, people that are on wait lists, people that were not aware of this. We know that colleges and universities, based on SHEV, have bumped back acceptance deadlines and deadlines for people to make a determination because their FAFSAs haven't come back, and there have been all kinds of issues with FAFSA because they've redone that this year. So rather than granting people in this program the grace that everyone else in the state is being afforded to make their college decisions, people in this program are tagged to the 15th. And that's something that we were very disappointed that the governor did not extend in his executive directive number 7, because he absolutely had the authority to do that and chose not to do so.
So has it passed? It's a said deal. It's done and it's passed. If you are 90% or 100% PNT or Gold Star family, your education and benefits in Virginia have been cut.
So they have, well, the program technically still is in place. However, last Monday we were in Richmond, and we actually even had the opportunity to speak with a number of legislators. So we spoke with people in the House, we spoke with people in the Senate, imploring them that the language that was disseminated on Saturday the 11th as the new budget, so this is HB-SB 6001, and the language in that budget is the most restrictive language that we've seen to date. It requires families that are applying to submit a FAFSA. The submission of the FAFSA isn't necessarily the problem. What the problem is that they are requiring you to pay your entire expected family contribution. They are requiring you to pay your Chapter 35. So if you're 100% TNP or a Gold Star family, you're eligible for Chapter 35 benefits. They're requiring that to be imputed prior to this program paying a penny. So they effectively become last dollar. And if you know anything about the new FAFSA, it's been an absolute disaster. There was a video where SHEV themselves were talking about extending deadlines for colleges and universities based on the fact that they knew that this new FAFSA was a total disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the grandfathering deadline for qualifying under the old conditions of this program was 2 days after the bill was signed on May 15th. So there's been no announcement. People have no idea that this has happened. Our Facebook group has grown from 300 to 1,200 people in a week because a lot of people got caught by surprise. And even to this day, if you pull up the VMS DEP webpage, if you pull up the State Council for Higher Education webpage, there is no notification or no information that has been provided to people that are either eligible for this program or even those that are currently using the program.
Yeah, so I want to roll back because you said something that is, to me, seems very, very weird, that the state is mandating the use of a federal benefit. Is that even, I'm not a lawyer, is that legal? Can Virginia say, hey, Chapter 35, which is a stipend?
Yes.
Right now it's $14.88. That's
Yep.
what a beneficiary would receive.
Correct.
To go to higher education. How can the state say, hey, that $14.88, that $1,488, it's mine? What's the language from the state to the federal government on how federal taxpayer dollars should be spent?
So I'm not an attorney, so I'll just make that clear. I'm not an attorney. We are very concerned, and we spoke to the VA yesterday when we called them, and they said that they will never pay Chapter 35 money to the state, that it will always be paid to individuals. That's the way that it was set up. The way that this program has now been changed also basically puts it in the hands of the State Council for Higher Education. So if you look at that from a federal level, that's basically the equivalent of moving the GI Bill from the Department of Veterans Affairs to the Department of Higher Education, or the Department of Education. Who knows more about veterans?
Yeah.
I mean, it's very clear that the Department of Veterans Services should be running the show on this, but by adding the FAFSA, that allows SHEV to get their hand in the pot, and that's where we are. But to answer your question, absolutely. I don't know that is legal for them to do that. And I think that's certainly a question that the people at the governor's office should be asking themselves as to whether or not there's any legal ground here.
Are there any legal actions that can be taken? And if so, by who against this bill?
So I'm not an attorney. I don't know. What I do know is that Virginia very proudly called itself the first state to consider military spouses and military dependents as a protected class. So we are considered a protected class in the state of Virginia. We also know that there was no dual notice provided to anyone before these changes, nor were they actually legislated. They were legislated through the budget. There was no public hearing. There was no opportunity for people to speak out. There was no opportunity for people to engage in legislators. The other thing that's interesting here is that the State Council for Higher Education in their strategic plan mentions the word equity 56 times in 14 pages, which is great. And we totally support that. But the percentage of disabled veterans that are minorities and need to be supported by that equity is far greater than the regular population. So by cutting this benefit to the populations that they are actually saying that they're intending to serve 56 times really seems very disingenuous.
That's probably my number one question. Just from, I have 4 kids myself, and that $14.88 per child per month is going to be not just life-changing to them, but that's also money not out of my pocket to spend on whatever it is kids are doing, right?
Right.
So if you were face-to-face with the governor of Virginia right now, what would you say?
You made a big mistake. You need to own it. You made a big mistake signing this. We were outside of the press room before you went to sign the bill. We asked you specifically, are you aware that you are signing the largest rollback of veterans benefits in the history of the state of Virginia? And we were told that you would make this right. Your executive directive number 7 not only did not make it right, it made it even more restrictive than the budgetary language that was already there. You've promised to create a task force that was representative of the populations being impacted by this, but that task force only intends to look at the unintended consequences of the budgetary language. It doesn't intend to look at the program sustainability overall. It doesn't allow to look at the SHEV numbers that we know are not accurate, true, or realistic. That's the information that legislators were handed when they were asked to make this decision. They were basically told, this is how much this is going to cost. This program is going to be $180 million, and there's no way that the colleges and universities can afford it. Now, this program constitutes only 5% of tuition waivers in the state of Virginia. So this is the only waiver program that was attacked this year. This is the only waiver program that has been required to submit a FAFSA. This is the only waiver program that is basically being looked at. So if we are, as a state, in a year where we have a $2 billion surplus, if we are as a state looking at waiver programs, why is it that veterans and Gold Star families, the most vulnerable of our population, who have genuinely given parts of themselves to this country, if not their entire life, why are these families being attacked and impacted?
Yes, that is such a solid question. And can you explain just what a Gold Star family member is? Do you know someone who's been affected by this? Because Memorial Day is this weekend, right around the corner.
Yeah. So Gold Star families are families who have had a member of their family die in the line of service. So die defending our country. And there are many Gold Star families who have joined us in this process of trying to rectify this mistake that has been made by the state of Virginia. One family in particular, there is a girl that her father died when she was 28 days old. So does not have any memory of her father, grew up without a father, is an outstanding member of her community. She's won numerous academic and community service awards. This young woman found out on her 18th birthday that her VMS step benefits may no longer be there. I mean, talk about the ultimate. I mean, you're impacted in such a way for your entire existence, but you've been promised this service earned benefit that, we know your dad's not there. We're going to make sure that your higher education is taken care of. And now it's pulled out from under your feet.
Does this make Virginia one of the worst states to live in as a veteran? So, for instance, I left the Marine Corps out of Quantico, and I stayed here for jobs and for Virginia's veteran benefits. That was a huge decision that I had to make. But there are tons of other states that have similar benefits to Virginia. But now with the VMS DEP gone, where does Virginia stand as far as best states for veterans and Gold Star family members?
So VMS step is not gone completely. I would argue that it's unusable. So basically that we know that, so if you're a retired CWO2 and you have retirement pay, that retirement pay would impute a $12,000 expected family contribution. So if your tuition is $14,500, your retirement pay imputes a $12,000 EFC. On top of that, you then have to contribute all of your Chapter 35 money. So it doesn't even get to a single dollar that VMS STEP is going to pay. So Virginia actually goes from being pull my chart out. Virginia actually goes from being one of the best states for this program to one of the worst. And the most ironic piece about this is that Virginia, Governor Youngkin ran on the premise that he was going to promise to make Virginia one of the most veteran-friendly states in the nation. Not only did he run on that, Virginia has a compact with its military. It is literally in statute that it is to protect military family members, veterans themselves. But there's literally a statutory requirement to protect veterans. Yet this population was the population that was most impacted by this, and it makes no sense to me whatsoever.
So basically, it's still called VMS DEP, but it's absolutely not, because VMS DEP is free education for not 90% plus or Gold Star families. This is something entirely different. And I really want to ask you, should veterans and Gold Star family members consider moving out of Virginia?
I think that's definitely something that people need to put into their financial equation. I mean, for my family in particular, we chose to forego our final move to stay in Virginia to use this benefit. So in that instance, we actually lost out financially because we had counted on this. We had expected to use this benefit. I think people need to look at some of the costing that's coming out right now. We have a chart that's available to show what you're going to actually pay out of pocket compared to what you would have paid out of pocket previously. And in some instances, I'm sure that it is absolutely financially advantageous for people to leave the state of Virginia based on this benefit being modified.
What role does the State Council for Higher Education have in this whole thing?
That's an interesting question. So SHEV, as they're called, has a council, and on their council, 1/3 of their council members are currently sitting members of Board of Visitors on state universities. So the interesting thing about that is that means they're wearing two hats. So in one hand, they're supposed to be looking out for the interests of the State Council for Higher Education. But while simultaneously sitting on that Board of Visitors, they're also looking out for the interests of the Board of Visitors. So it's kind of difficult to understand who's wearing what hat. What we do know is that 1/3 of the members of the current SHEV Council are sitting board members for the universities that have been the most vocal about cutting this program. So we do find that to be very ironic. There was a SHEV meeting that took place just after the budget vote last Monday. I believe that General Jumper, who is a retired Air Force general, specifically mentioned in that video, what is this veterans issue that is on fire right now? I'm sure you can link that, but there is also some information that he talks about on there about, well, if they just have to fill out a FAFSA, then we can just send people to the high schools to help them do that. That's not the remedy. The numbers are not, just filling out a FAFSA isn't the problem. It's the expected financial contribution with no notice to families that is the problem.
If that's not the remedy, then what is the remedy?
They need to go back. So the governor needs to call a special session, and in that legislation, they need to repeal all of the language that was put in HB SB 6001. They need to start from scratch, and they need to make decisions based on actually audited, correct, and accurate numbers. We believe that this decision was made in haste. We believe the decision was made with the knowledge that there were inaccurate numbers between DVS, SHEV, and the universities themselves. For example, William and Mary, if you go onto the SHEV website right now and you look at the number of students that are receiving waivers from the state of Virginia, it states that that number is somewhere around 117. If you go and you look how many students are using VMS STEP waivers, it states that that number is 187. That's simply not possible if it's a total of 117 people that are using waivers in their entirety.
And getting down to the last questions here, what are some other ways that this impacts veterans and Gold Star family members outside of like education benefits? How are veterans being affected right now?
I think a lot of people are spiraling. I think part of the problem is that people were not told. Again, to this date, there is no information available on the VMS DEP website. There is no information on the Department of Veterans Services website. There is no information on the State Council for Higher Education's website. Nobody has been contacted. Nobody has been notified. You have a bunch of people that have high school seniors, some of whom committed prior to the May 15th deadline. Some of them did not because they didn't know. There are people that are still on wait lists that were not capable of committing by the May 15th deadline. So you have a lot of veterans who potentially have PTSD or other mental health conditions that are spiraling. We know specifically in our group, which is 13 or 12 or 1,300 people right now, that there are 3 people that have had to go back to the doctor in the last week that were weaned off of psych medications that have had to go back on them as a result of the personal financial stress that has come from this situation and not knowing how they're going to provide for their family. They have made long-term family plans based on this. I think it cannot be underestimated the stress impact that this has had on this entire population. And we know that this is a population that is vulnerable. We know that this is a population that going into Memorial Day itself can be very triggering for veterans. What about there are plenty of people that, well, I came home, but the person that replaced me when my wife was pregnant didn't. So I'm going to be calling that family, and I'm calling that Gold Star family to reach out at the same time while I'm not knowing if I'm going to be able to pay for my child to go to school in the fall. So when we initially started our Facebook group, we did a little survey just because I'm a numbers geek and that's my thing. But we did a survey, and the survey specifically looked at a couple of indicators. And so the indicators that were important to me were how many people had made major financial decisions based on the expectation of using this program. So at the time, our group was about 200 people, 125 people completed the survey. 93% stated that they had made major financial decisions for their family based on the expectation of using this program. 91% said that they wanted DVS to administer this. They did not want the State Council for Higher Education to be administering a veteran's benefit. And then 76% of the people stated that they would not seek out this higher education program if this program were not available to them. So when the higher education institutions say, oh, this is making us poor because if this person wasn't here, it would be supplemented by somebody who was paying in full, that's not actually a true statement. 75% of students that seek higher education in the state of Virginia receive some kind of aid. So even if it was not a full payer, most of the people that have access to this benefit wouldn't use it. So it's not lost dollars for them. The other piece that's interesting with SHOVE is it appears that they have been calculating the numbers based on an imputed full-time student cost. They're also charging the state a retail cost for higher education. So the marginal cost for a student is what it actually costs to educate them versus the price tag that's on the education. So we have yet to get access to those numbers. We don't know what they actually are. We also know that they are showing full-time student costs for people that are only taking 3 hours a semester because they count it as a full-time student, whether you're taking 3 hours or whether you're taking 25 hours. We would really love to get some accurate data. And I think that that's what we were hoping that the governor's amendments and asking for the comprehensive study would do. The current study and the scope from his executive directive number 7 does not afford that. It affords a very small scope looking only at the unintended consequences of the budget bill that massacred this. It does not afford the ability to look beyond that.
So I definitely want to thank you for coming out today, especially when my house is flooded. I want to give you the floor. Any last words you want to say? Look in that camera and speak to the people, speak to the governor, say whatever it is you want to say.
I think that one of the most important piece of this is that there were decisions made in haste without accurate or representative data that impact thousands of families in the state of Virginia. 70% of the people in our group have stated that they stayed in Virginia with the intention of using this benefit. This really pulls the rug out from under people right going into Memorial Day. This is a very sensitive time of the year. For some families that you have kids graduating and going off to college, that should be a happy time. People should be focused on prom. They should be focused on graduation. Instead, they're focused on the fact, I promised my kid that they could go to school next year because the state of Virginia made a promise that the state is not keeping. The state of Virginia is not upholding its Veterans Compact. It is not upholding the promises made to veterans in the state of Virginia. And not only is it not going to be the most veteran-friendly state in the nation, as Governor Youngkin ran on for his tagline, it is going to turn into one of the worst. And I think the concern that a lot of veterans have in the state right now is if this benefit can be cut by legislating through the budget with no notice to anyone else, what is going to happen to every other benefit for veterans in this state? And I think finally, you can, to Governor Youngkin, you can delegate tasks to other people, but you cannot delegate accountability and responsibility. And ultimately, sir, this falls in your hands.